told me there were girls in that fucking can. You could have told me, so I didn't just shove them back in the stacks like I did, right? Why the fuck didn't you tell me what was in that motherfucking can?
Now you want to know what's in the cans? Before you wanted to know nothing, now you ask. Guns, okay? Drugs, whores, vodka, BMWs, beluga caviar, or bombs maybe, Bad terrorists with big nuclear bombs.
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hello, welcome to Caught on the Wire. We're back again, this time for the second episode of Season 2, Collateral Damage. We hope you enjoyed our first episode last week, back after Christmas. We certainly think we're getting better. We're still very new to this podcasting lark, but we're certainly getting into it and we're enjoying it, and so we hope you guys are too. We're back very soon, actually. It's only been a 3-day break since our last recording, following some delays for the first episode, and we've actually decided to change the way that we're gonna host the podcast. Actually, I think Alex wants to detail those with you. So should I pass you over to Alex and he'll explain how things are changing?
Thank you, Toby. Yeah, so basically the podcast has proved either we misjudged the whole kind of hosting element, or we misjudged how many people would be listening to it, or whatever. But long story short, we pay for an account on this website where we host the podcast, and we get a certain bandwidth limit, which is based by the number of downloads or listens that we get. And even though we've upgraded once already, we've hit that limit again, and we can't really afford to upgrade the account anymore. So what we're going to do is, by the time this episode comes out, the iTunes stream will contain only the current season that we're working on. So I'll be removing all of the episodes from Season 1, but you can still get hold of them on the website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. There's a little podcast page, and you can download all of the episodes we've done from there, and you can also listen to them on YouTube if you're so inclined as well. So they'll still be available if new people are coming to the show. They'll just have to use those avenues instead until they either catch up with the live cast that we've got going on iTunes or whatever. But yeah, that's what's going to happen, just because that's the most economic way that I can think of solving the problem.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, if you listen with us as they come out, you shouldn't be affected by it at all. It will be just the ones that you need at the moment that you've got. So, yeah, I think it's a nice change. And I wasn't able to catch up with episode 2 in HD, unfortunately. I managed to find my wire stash and decided I couldn't quite justify buying another episode. But I will be forking out for the Blu-ray set once it appears on our shores. So it's odd making the transition back to SD. Actually, it makes you realise how much we've become adjusted to this high definition telly stuff, and it really does look highly pixelated and kind of stretched and weird. Because I watch it in 16:9 anyway. Actually, I kind of stretch the screen out just because I prefer just to kind of have the whole screen occupied. So
I can't deal with the stretching.
It's odd. It does look weird for the first 5 seconds, but you kind of adjust to it. Yeah. So yeah, it was back to normal for me. And as we always do, we kind of pass the recap baton. So it's Alex's turn this week. Should we get going? I'll pass it over to you.
Yes, it's time for the recap, and I'm going to be doing it with a slight twist on what you were doing last week. So we'll be breaking it up into larger chunks this time. But there will be sub-chunks, which is a very strange word. Yeah. So nice basically you'll be taking it into the big parts and just breaking them up a little bit, because otherwise they're going to be too long, and I don't want us to miss anything, basically.
Yeah.
So unless there's anything else, we'll get started.
Yeah, let's go.
So the first track we're going to be following is with the Jane Does, basically, are girls found dead in the can. And we start with the first one, which is Officer B.D. Russell deals with various agencies trying to decide who has to take responsibility for investigating the deaths of the 13 girls found in the cargo container. Coroner Randall Frazier establishes the cause of death as suffocation because of crushed air pipe on top of the container. The damage to the air supply is deemed accidental due to cargo moving, and so the case is handed back to BD because the deaths are considered accidental. So that's basically our setting up of the Jane Doe's track.
Yeah, fantastic opening as always. Very bleak actually. The snow's falling outside and all the corpses sprawled out in their body bags. It's pretty bewildering stuff. I guess we're suddenly in a very different show, it feels like, at the start of this episode. We're kind of right at the start of a big, scary, exciting death investigation with a very unknown character, Beady. I guess he's as clueless as we are, really, when it comes to this death investigation by the looks of things. So, instantly throws us into rooting for Beady, which I really liked about this scene. She becomes very likeable from the start.
Yeah, it's kind of something maybe we didn't have so much of in the first season, which was someone who was a lot more shocked by everything going on around us. Yeah, in the first season, kind of everyone feels kind of seasoned in a way to all of the violence and the horror, and Beatty, she's just used to driving around the port and making incredibly good spots at the cargo containers.
I think she needs to stick to that. It doesn't look like she's equipped for a death investigation.
She's got eyes of a hawk, but she's clearly never seen a body before.
No, and that contrasts heavily to all the responsibility shirking that goes on elsewhere with people just literally laughing about the Jane Does and trying to shift them onto whoever would take them. Completely kind of disconnected from the actual reality of it. So.
It's interesting how the people from CID, which I think I'm right in understanding stands for Criminal Investigation Division.
That's it, yeah.
They don't want to investigate whether or not it's a crime.
It's cargo. It's
they just want to protect themselves, and they're talking about these human beings as cargo.
I mean, later on, the actual ship where the crime scene is, the Atlantic Light. Not even the Atlantic Light wanted to investigate it. Or wanted it investigated if it meant they were held for more than one evening. So, there's just an absolute culture of apathy everywhere you look. I think that's perhaps the major theme of this episode, really, is kind of the shirking of the responsibility at every angle. It's shocking stuff, but you can understand where it comes from. It's all driven from this numbers game, and it feels very, very much a part of The Wire.
We also see the coroner for the second time. I think he turns up in The Detail, which is the second episode of series 1.
He was the
one he's involved with the death of. He's involved with the Gant investigation.
That's right. Or the autopsy of Gant, I think he conducts. Yeah. You never really see what his character is, really. He's there on a fair few occasions. He always seems likeable. Seems to have a good relationship with McNulty, which can't be said for many people, I guess. I guess there's a respect there. You get the sense that Frasier's an honourable man and kind of is one of the ones who looks for the right in the criminal system. But I guess it's hard to say with Frasier, really. He's still kind of living under a rock as far as the character goes.
Yeah, he just turns up to be very clever every now and again, and that's about it.
I think this is actually probably his meatiest appearance, isn't it? He's in quite a few of the scenes here, and he's very helpful at understanding where these girls may have come from, particularly when it comes to their plastic surgery and things like that. So,
although he does have a little bit of help from the State Bureau of Mines.
I think that might have gone over my head, that comment, really. It's a strange one, wasn't it?
But I guess we'll talk about that scene later.
Yeah. So I guess does that cover the opening?
So I think that covers that one. So let's go for the second one in the Jane Doe track.
Yeah.
So Bunk and Jimmy eat some crabs together. It's a very strange sounding sentence. And McNulty is avoiding Colonel Rawls. Bunk chastises him for dumping the case on Ray Cole, but McNulty dismisses Cole's troubles as collateral damage. McNulty then leaves his shift early to visit the container and discusses the case with B.D. Russell. he thinks that there may be a link between the girls in the container and his floater, and Beatty tells him about an extra bedroll in the container. McNulty checks the crushed air pipe and notes that it appears to have been crushed deliberately, and the coroner agrees that this is grounds to consider the girls murdered. As a result, Rules ends up meeting with Ronnie, who is a commander of the port police, and resists an attempt to hand off the 13 murders. Meanwhile, McNulty convinces the coroner to estimate time of death based on the amount of air in the container to see if it matches when the other girl was dumped in the water. Rules later meets with the commanders of all the other jurisdictions involved with the bodies, and despite his protestations, they insist that the murders occurred in his jurisdiction. And the cases are assigned to Landsman Squad, who can only look on crestfallen as they are written up on the board.
Oh, okay, so quite a few things in there. Yeah, so, I mean, first
basically
of all,
the police department reacting.
yeah,
that section.
A very good part of the episode, actually. First of all, I mean, the smell in that interview room must be incredible, really. All that tight space and all that enclosed crab. I've never actually had a crab properly off the leg like that, but I'm sure it's lovely. Very indulgent kind of Baltimore
Very
break.
native. That,
yeah, it's
that
very
approach.
kind of a love letter to Baltimore style kind of lunch break, isn't it? And we get our title quote with the collateral damage.
We do, yeah.
A very specific type of collateral damage. I mean, there's all sorts of collateral damage in The Wire, but in this instance, Cole eats the case, or so he thinks he does, until there's more collateral damage to come when Bunk and Lester eat it later on. Yeah.
It's interesting that we still have McNulty withholding information on Omar. I don't know if I'm still not quite sure if I've figured out kind of what McNulty's motive is here.
I assume that McNulty genuinely doesn't have any idea where Omar is, because the last he saw of him was putting on a bus to New York, wasn't he? It is odd how much they draw attention to this whole Omar needs Bunk thing, because it seems to define the first kind of 3 episodes or so is just Bunk saying over and over again, "Where's Omar? Where's Omar? Where's Omar?" But I didn't think there's anything fishy going on with him, because eventually I think McNulty actually goes to desperate measures to try and find Omar, doesn't he? How does he find him in the end? Because he turns up in the next episode, doesn't he? But I forgot how he takes him Thai shopping and all the rest of it. So there's my Wire knowledge. There's a few gaps in it. We'll have to come back to it. But yeah, it's because
just as I'm watching it, I've just been wondering, exactly why he's behaving in that manner. It seems a little bit out of character, as if there's some sort of hidden reason for it, and they're placing, like you say, a lot of emphasis on it. So it's just not quite. I think I must have missed something somewhere.
Yeah, I guess
it feels a bit odd.
It's a big case for them, and Omar's obviously an integral part of that. He needs to testify in the court, as he said he would. I guess normally they have their eyes on witnesses and stuff like that. And
McNulty's too proud to just say, "I don't know."
Yeah, that's a very good point as well, actually. Yeah, it's hard for him to admit defeat in pretty much every situation, isn't it, McNulty? So
he just kind of wants Bunk to feel like, I'm on the case, kind of.
Not to worry, McNulty.
Don't worry about me. I'm smarter than everyone.
It is funny seeing McNulty kind of just drifting, which he spends most of this season doing, like trying to find constructive things to do with himself, and that's the only reason that the tides calculation came along, I'm sure. Just giving lots of shits when he's not meant to give shits, like kind of the lady. He spends half the season trying to find the backstory of this one Jane Doe that he kind of makes his case. So I'm sure he's got the time to go and find Omar if he really wants to.
This is also the section where we have that scene, firstly where we see Lester Freeman for the first time since starting the season, since ending the last season. He's introduced just as such an afterthought. He's just kind of there,
it's
like
just
one
a
of
matter
the
of fact,
main characters.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I was
season,
reassigned.
They just dump him in, and he's just there. You're like, oh, it's Lester. There he is.
Yeah, which is exactly the same as his first appearance in season 1, which was also in the second episode. He's just silent, isn't he, in the detail room, just kind of staring at everyone making fools of themselves, and you just kind of assume he's another hump. So yeah, it's again a very matter of fact kind of return for the character. No grandstand.
And then we have Rules sort of almost like a salute of some kind.
Yes,
to the people in the office.
He was convinced that he'd dumped those bodies elsewhere. It was pretty funny.
Seemed very sure of himself.
Yeah, I'm on the case, a bit like McNulty.
I feel like with rules, there's got to be, if you ask the character why he does that, he'd make some kind of like fisting comment. So I think it's got to be something related to that.
Yeah, this essentially, yes, I'd have thought he's a fairly graphic character, as we saw in his introduction. So
he's a very vulgar man.
Yeah, absolutely. What
and
else
it's nice to see all of those commanders from the other jurisdictions. There's like the
Coast Guard guy, right?
There's the Coast Guard. They have the
Anne Arundel County as well is like possibly going to take it, and then there's also Baltimore County.
Is it Customs as well? They have like a Customs guy as well.
There's a lot of people kind of trying to pass the buck.
It's a lot of brass in one room.
Yeah, and those scenes were great. They really hit home for us, the viewers. I think how desensitized a lot of the world is to death, and particularly when they're joking about the autopsies, and you see how it becomes routine to just talk about it in this way when you're working in this sort of environment. But it's just need to evade this to keep the operation smooth, and it makes a lot of sense. And also the fact that McNulty kind of drinks 14 shots for 14 dead girls. It's all there. It's all just kind of taken in its stride.
Well, that actually brings me on to the third and final part of our Jane Doe section, where we have Freeman, Bunk, and McNulty drinking themselves into a serious state at their regular bar.
Yeah.
And obviously that includes McNulty doing those 14 shots for 14 dead girls. The homicide detectives bought these shots for McNulty to mark the cases he brought to them. And when they return to the detail, Landsman tells them Cole is working their cases while they are assigned the Jane Does from the port. That's Bunk and Freeman. They later travel to the Port Authority Police Department and meet with Beatty, and then begin to interrogate the crew of the Atlantic Light.
Yes.
So it's just covering the final part as they move into their own investigation.
Definitely. So we get Bunk and Lester being shifted with the Jane Does. You assume that it's not just because they want to put their best detectives on it. You also assume there's an element of rules trying to at least have some sort of revenge on Jimmy for what he's done to him, and try and fuck over those who are closest to him. But in this case, it was a wise allocation of resources nonetheless, even if it wasn't from a genuine place.
Well, also, as he makes it clear, he doesn't want a detective like Cole on a situation with, all of these whodunits. Yeah,
he's as they established last. Oh no, that was Santangelo, wasn't he? He was the incompetent one. But I guess they kind of, the way Cole plays his character, you get the sense that he's a fairly similar kind of a guy who comes into the office to do his day's work sort of thing. He doesn't really have the intuition he needs, perhaps. So, yeah. It was odd seeing Beatty though, because she did seem to have some knowledge, quite helpful towards the case, like of the trafficking industry, the idea of the shepherds, and sorry, we're kind of going back to the previous one here a little bit, but it's talking about the kind of quality of detective work, and they kind of nailed it down to that broken air pipe very quickly, didn't they? Beatty seemed to notice it kind of from the start. So I thought that was very good. So I'm kind of drifting here a little bit. I'm sure we can cut a little bit of this out. But
I'd also wanted to add that Dominic West is very good drunk in that scene in the bar.
Yes, yeah, fantastic actually. Very, very funny as well with the Lester, Bunk and McNulty played themselves sort of perfectly there. And it's good to see Lester finally, rejoining the crew, because he's kind of just been left to the side so far this season, and they have a nice kind of piss up to bring them all back together. And Jimmy ends up with a rules-based erection, which always entertains me. So,
yeah. All right. So, do you want to move on to our next main track?
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say about the
There was
Jane Doe's.
one thing that struck me as odd was Jimmy saying that he can take 11 more years on the police force before he takes his pension, which made me wonder, is he 49 years old at the very least? So I just wondered kind of.
What you think? You think McNulty might be 49?
Well, if he's got 11 more years to go before he can take his pension and run away, he's got another thing coming.
Yeah, that seems kind of old.
Yeah, but if you retire at 60. So, unless he's talking about changing jobs, yeah, maybe in America they're very young pension ages, but
and it will vary, probably vary by state and by.
Yeah, it just struck me as a bit odd. We never really know how old McNulty is, do we? It's just
anyone who knows the answer to that question can email us at caughtonthewire@gmail.com.
Absolutely. Yeah, should we move on to the next?
So yeah, let's move on. So our next main track is the feud between the stevedores and the Eastern District, or specifically Sobotka and Valchek. So we start with Sobotka, or Frank Sobotka, having an angry meeting with his smuggling contact Spiros Fondes in the Greek's cafe regarding the dead girls on his docks. Frank is primarily concerned that if the deaths were deliberate, then he could have prevented them if he had known that there were girls in the container. Fondes reassures him that the deaths were accidental and explains that their driver Sergei was waiting for a contact to come off the ship and signal him that it was safe to take the container, but he never came off. Fondes explains that they are trying to find out exactly what happened themselves. I really like this scene. All of the diner scenes are always so good.
Mm. Yeah, it's. I think Sobotka was perhaps the king of the scene, though. I mean, he had two fantastic kind of anger rage moments in this episode.
Yeah.
This being the first of them. But then again, it was followed up very, very, very sneakily by Spiros, who used very persuasive language on all occasions. Gives him a very convincing message about not knowing what's in the cans because his conscience can't handle it. It's for the best for everyone. So I thought it was a very logical scene, and the argument made a lot of sense.
It's another great scene of contrasting emotions and contrasting feelings towards a situation.
Yeah.
Like earlier you mentioned, we have all those people from the port not really caring about everything that's going on, just passing it off as just an inconvenience to them. And then here we have, Spiros and Sergei, and they seem very relaxed about the whole thing, and they're just kind of coldly saying, we're going to get this sorted. Sobotka, the passionate union man, getting angry, is just another really good example of
difference between them. Yeah,
two extremes being portrayed and executed really, really well.
They're just the ultimate pragmatists, the Greeks. Like that, there's no point in raising your voice in almost any any circumstance. You can get your message across through persuasive language and just convincing them and using your wisdom, which is exactly what Spiros does. He's a very kind of very, well, I wouldn't say alluring. That sounds almost a little bit homoerotic, but he's he's kind of an easy guy to like, even though he's an absolute master criminal. And there was that elusive bit of Greek that was spoken at the end, which I haven't tried to bother kind of translating. But I'd be interested.
Well, the cat's out the bag between you and Spiros, anyway.
He's got that effect on people. He really does. I'm sure Nick feels it. Yeah. And it's also the first time that they've drawn attention to the fact that the Greek is the Greek. Last week, the Greek was a guy in a cafe reading a newspaper, and he was always at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus. Whereas this week, they actually have a close-up shot where he's the center of the frame. We know that he's now more than just a guy in a bar. So that's kind of something that I probably didn't consider at all. Well, on my first watch, it would have been a very different kind of viewing.
They have started giving the Greek a little bit of a not stereotypical or cliche, but there is this kind of like you see him before you see him. He has this kind of calling card. We have two examples of it in this episode. So we see that Greek newspaper.
Yeah,
and it's we can't see it. And it's the Greek newspaper, the Greek, and then there he is. And then later on in the final scene where they have Sam, they have that crewman from the ship, and they're interrogating him. We see this cigarette butt sort of fly onto the floor, and then he steps in. It's a little bit cinematic almost.
Yeah.
Like the bad guy in the film, he has some kind of tell so that you know that it's him before he actually arrives. And you're like, uh-oh, here comes the big scary man kind of thing. And they I'm wondering if there are any other examples of that, either from this episode or others. But they're kind of putting this big, they're building a lot of mythos around him, which seems appropriate for a Greek, even though he may not actually be Greek, but
definitely.
Whatever.
And that's why they deliberately kind of confused us with the Greek without subtitling it, I imagine. So just to prove a point that there's a lot about these guys that we will never be able to understand, and their operation is so secretive.
I turned on the subtitles and was disappointed when nothing appeared. Like,
yeah.
Where's my translation?
It doesn't seem like a very David Simon friendly measure to put in a show, zero hand holding. So yeah, it was a great scene, very good scene.
So the second part of our feud, we have. So we go back to the Union House, and we have Horseface complaining to Frank that the port police are hassling him over some missing cases of vodka, 4 cases to be precise. Another stevedore then comes in complaining that the police are ticketing their cars. So they leave, and Frank approaches the officer, who turns out to be Sergeant Ellis Carver, back in uniform. And Frank sees that they are being ticketed on frivolous charges, and complains accordingly. Carver reveals that the ticketing is at the behest of Stan Valchek. So the next day, Valchek comes to the Union Hall, where he angrily accuses Frank of illegally funding the stained glass window in the church. Frank dismisses Valchek's threats, and the Major leaves to visit a property developer named Andy Krawcheck, where he discusses trying to reclaim his donation from the church. He then learns that Frank Sobotka's union have been making political contributions, have hired a lobbyist, and generally show a lot of cash for a failing industrial organisation. So then, Valchek, still on his travels, then meets with Deputy Commissioner Burrell and talks about his nomination for police commissioner. And after promising to use his influence to get his predominantly white district to support Burrell as commissioner, Valchek then requests a detail to investigate Frank Sobotka's union.
Whoa.
So there's a big chunk there about the feud kicking into gear.
The Polish War, yeah. I guess, should we talk about that, the opening scene of this, where we kind of sweep into Sobotka's office? Almost as if eavesdropping. It's a very kind of creepy, very slow kind of pan towards the office, as if we're sneaking up on them to, again, eavesdrop, which is a very important part of this show.
There's quite a few shots like that we'll discuss in this episode.
There's a nice one with Avon's cell and D'Angelo kind of through the crack in the door. So I'm sure we'll get to those. They're kind of almost, when you take them out of context, they're almost kind of horror movie creepy, a kind of found footage POV about them. There's something a little bit unsettling about them. But I really liked it, yeah. And seeing Carver again is always nice. He made quite a nice development last season. We see that he's putting his promotion to good use. Well, not necessarily. I'm sure Valchek's giving him quite a cushy job here, but you can imagine kind of Valchek taking him into his district as he worked with Prez and helped take some of the stink off of him, as Valchek puts it. So it all kind of makes a lot of continuous sense. And
Carver, as likeable as he is going for that career track. He does want to protect himself.
Yeah.
He's not going to be all sort of moralistic like McNulty. He's just going to do what he's told, and certainly in that point of time in the season, this Ellis Carver, he's kind of got a kind of Daniels-esque determination to rise about him.
Yeah.
Or certainly what Daniels had when he first started.
He's certainly sitting down and shutting up and taking his orders, isn't he? Which is, the smart way to get up the ladder, yeah. So, yeah. But it's nice that he points out that he works for a gaping arsehole. He doesn't totally suck up to him. So,
yeah, that he remains likable because he's not gonna. It's not because he's a pushover in that sense.
Yeah.
He's just preserving. It's just self-preservation.
Yeah, definitely. I guess that's followed by our very satisfying kind of cockfight between Valchek and Sobotka.
Yeah, I kept the little bit in the recap short about that because there's a lot to say.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting little argument between them, and it's you don't actually see that many, like for a show with an awful lot of friction in it. There aren't actually that many moments where characters really argue.
No.
So it is quite almost cathartic to kind of see them go at each other in that way and to really kind of like tear into one another, because normally it happens by proxy or at a distance in some way. It feels a lot more personal, this feud.
And normally,
even though really we don't really kind of understand it in that same way. We can't really relate to it because it's a stained glass window and it's all about political lobbying, but to kind of make it that personal very quickly is obviously how they've managed to take something that's quite, off the wall in some ways and make it really relatable.
And they, normally I think there's a fair bit of, voice raising in The Wire, but normally it's a character that we like at the receiving end of verbal abuse, whereas in this case we do get that catharsis, as you say, because Sobotka is already understood to be a very honourable man, a man of the people, and he's putting Valchek, who really needs to be put to sleep, really, in his place. So it's really satisfying, and it kind of goes back to some really deep-seated teenage anxiety issues, which are kind of glossed over, but we can kind of get a sense of what their school days were like. And there's also a really odd eye gesture that Horseface makes to indicate that Valchek's arrived. I'm wondering what the history is there. It looks like perhaps he poked Sobotka in the eye or something back in the day. So I think he actually references take your finger out your eye or something, stick your finger in your eye, something like that. But that was a nice bit of kind of mythology that never needs to be explained, but it kind of just adds a bit of depth to the world.
Certainly, in this episode, one of the main reasons we're getting more of these confrontations is just because of Frank is quite an angry man in this episode.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense for him because he's running out of options. He hasn't really got the money to do the talking for him. He has to really make a hullabaloo of things to get noticed. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. His reaction and his following actions are justified based on his position. I mean, like you say, he just needs to save himself as well as others.
Absolutely. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have the Greeks who never need to raise their voices because the money can always do the talking for them, sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's no desperation there. I guess should we talk about Andy Krawczyk for a bit?
Yeah. So you were speaking about sort of unusual or unsettling shots. There's one here as well where we see them coming down the stairs in the reflection of like a table or something like that. And when you first see it, it almost looks like they're
on a bouncy castle.
Yeah, it looks like they're just bouncing up and down like, merrily.
I'm glad you noticed that. I wasn't sure whether to bring it up.
It's a really strange shot.
It is good. It is good.
Or it looks like they're kind of like on some kind of sports equipment, and they're just next to each other as they. Go back and check it again if you're not sure what we're talking about.
I think
it's a really strange shot.
I think everyone noticed it. I definitely noticed it. It's actually really funny, but because it feels almost too insignificant that you wouldn't have thought anyone would notice it. But I'm glad you brought it up because it is actually quite funny for what it is. There's some sort of Mr. Blobby dance move, I think.
And this is the first appearance of Andy Krawczyk as well.
Yes, he pops in and out, doesn't he? He's clearly a very knowledgeable man, big-ass developer, in with a lot of politicians in the city. Very used to backhanders, I'm sure. So, he's certainly Valchek's tap on a lot of what's going down on the docks and elsewhere.
He kind of forms part of this shady upper tier of not politicians but have a lot of political influence kind of people that we see more and more of as the show goes along.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. One of the Clay
He's
Davis
one of the
crew.
major players, yeah. He is kind of like that level.
Definitely. And it's odd because we see Valchek here make an astute policing observation that Frank has too much money. Not because he has good police intuition necessarily, but because he kind of just holds a selfish grudge against him. He's trying to force a case that does exist in the same way that Minotti kind of forces deaths to become murders against the will of the department. So you kind of have here Valchek forcing a stained glass window to become a conspiracy. So it's just an interesting way to kind of compare him to McNulty. They're both giving shits when it's not really their turn. both to fuel their own egos, but because McNulty does it for the greater good, he becomes likable, and Valchek certainly isn't. So, when
Valchek comes to leave the office where Krawcheck is, there's like they have a bit of a double meaning as he's looking at that model of the building. I've forgotten what the building's called.
The granary. Yeah.
The granary. Granary. That's how they say it. Yeah. So there's like a double meaning there where he says, "Yeah, I've seen worse," and it's like he's both talking about Burrell and the model, kind of in a way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 'cause the granary right now is Nick's local landmark that we spoke about last week. So I guess it hits home quite close when you consider it in that context. And lo and behold, that granary is now built, looking like that model certainly does anyway. And that I think Krawcheck also brings up, is it DiBiago, who's Sobotka's kind of lobbyist? And
it's mentioned briefly, yeah.
Yeah, and Krawcheck knows that he doesn't come cheap, which is one of Valchek's big PCs that he uses to start the. Not that he uses any PC, but it's it kind of cements it in his mind that there's something fishy about Sobotka.
And then after that we have Valchek going to see Burrell and them exchanging favours.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is the start of Burrell, becoming the acting commissioner, basically.
Yeah.
Which grows through this season as well.
That's right, yeah. It's a good scene actually. It's a bit of a strange ending with it's a bit cartoonish with the whole he's an arsehole cue laughter, but it lays it on pretty thick. Very sinister, but yeah, it's good. It's again,
and we see the hypocrisy in it as well. Burrell was really quick to kind of try and quash that detail beforehand when it was investigating any kind of money to do with politicians or policemen or whatever. But then, as soon as they start investigating a union leader's money, it's everyone gets their elbows in.
Yeah.
But then we later see, as we'll discuss when we get to that thing, that Burrell is not quite as invested as it first seems.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Does that conclude this section?
Yeah, that's that section. So if we move on to the third and final part of the feud.
Sure.
So we have Nick, Ziggy, and the other stevedores drink at Dolores' bar at breakfast time. And Ziggy approaches Nick with a connection named White Mike, who can supply them with drugs, and wants Nick to partner with him in buying the package and selling it off, but Nick refuses his offer. The ensemble then leave for work, but are stopped on the way by patrol officers, led by Carver again, who had established a DWI checkpoint courtesy of Valchek. Meanwhile, Ziggy, who's not working that day, meets White Mike alone and asks him to give him the package with payment to follow, but Mike refuses to trust him a third time. Later on, after being released from central booking on DUI charges, the stevedores complain to Frank about the police activity, and he admits his rivalry with Valchek. So, Horseface later infiltrates Valchek's district parking lot and steals a surveillance van filled with high-tech equipment. He drives it to the docks where Lala, Frank and Nick help him load it onto a container and seal it up, putting it in with the next group of containers to be shipped out of port, but not without taking some photos first. So, as Sobotka says, after they're getting out of central booking, if Valchek wants a war, then he's going to have one, and this is the start of it.
Yeah. And it's the ultimate fuck you, isn't it?
We kind of have our skirmish earlier on, don't we?
The skirmish being the actual
at the Union
argument.
House.
Yeah.
So they have a kind of skirmish, and then the war, and then the battle actually begins.
That's right, where they're on the opposite ends of the battlefield at that point. They're just kind of there to screw each other over by any means they can. Yeah. I guess we have our breakfast as well, don't we? With our protein-rich breakfast.
Yeah, we start off with them in Dolores.
That was it, yeah.
And they have that unusual combination of some kind of, what is it, like lager and an egg and
it's just a pint of
a
beer
shot
with
of something.
with an egg yolk, and then maybe a shot to wash it all down. Yeah, I'm not really sure at all what that would taste like. I imagine you maybe won't be able to taste the yolk. I mean, a raw egg yolk is probably going to be. I'm sure it's good for you, but it can't taste too good. So if you can drop it in a beer.
I would have thought lots of raw eggs like that would not be good for you.
Yeah, they're very edible, aren't they? I think.
I mean, you can eat them
yeah.
raw, but
I think
we're becoming a cooking show. Let's
yeah, let's fly away from that. But it's just a protein-rich breakfast for these dock workers.
Yeah, they just need something heavy to start the day, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't think they serve full English on the menu, so they have to satisfy with the egg in the beer.
We see Nick obviously not wanting to get involved with any of the drugs or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a big facepalm moment when you see Ziggy getting involved with the drugs. And I'd forgotten it was so early in the show as well. I thought this was something a little bit later when he becomes more frustrated. But right off the bat, episode 2, we're seeing Ziggy doing the most stupid kind of getting himself entangled with these drug guys. And you can totally understand Nick's reticence to go anywhere near him, despite the fact that he needs to care for him in Frank's absence as he deals with the Union. So it's really, really between rock and a hard place for him.
And we also see that Ziggy's not being entirely honest to Nick as well, because he puts it out as if it's like a first-time thing. But then when we see him later with White Mike, he's like, no, I'm not going to trust you a third time. You've already messed up 2 packages.
Very good point, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Then we have them being stopped by the police officers on that DWI checkpoint. We've sort of seen Nick backing out of one criminal activity and then ending up in another.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Do we assume that they've camped outside the pub watching them, or is it just a given that these guys drink every morning for breakfast? I assume
it's not entirely certain how they know, but I guess
I assume that they've set the checkpoint up, so they must have just assumed that these guys. It's probably just kind of a.
I mean, it is established that especially Frank and Stan, like they clearly know each other from years ago, and I guess maybe Valchek understands the stevedore culture enough to know that they all go there, and
it's the
I guess
of
it
their
wouldn't be a
community,
big mystery,
yeah.
would it?
Yeah.
So I think it's not unbelievable.
No. Not at all. Who the fuck gets drunk at 9 in the goddamn morning? So.
Well, they do to some extent.
Well, yeah, I was just quoting the guy trying to cover their asses, but yeah, it's clear that they do it every day. Yeah, so I was very much impressed with Sobotka's revenge on this, though. It certainly trumped this one with the Horseface is very brave and smooth theft. Clearly,
yeah, I thought the steal was a little bit too easy. Like,
I quite liked it. I just loved how
do they not have any cameras in a police car park?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I liked how.
I mean, that would be the one place that they'd be pointing cameras at, is in their own car park.
Most expensive vehicle in the car park. No, I liked Horseface's nonchalance and.
Most expensive vehicle in the car park that could be broken into with what looks like a steel rule.
Well, Donut uses the same thing to break into cars in season 4, doesn't he?
Yeah,
it's just kind of a
but that's just some like
a Baltimore weakness.
Just some random car.
Like some, yeah.
Don't know. You'd expect a fancy surveillance van to be. I guess they're not meant to look fancy.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know anything about stealing cars. I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah. But I guess it might just making the point that hiding in plain sight is, the best way to steal something in many cases, particularly when the car park is, kind of fairly busy and there's a few people moving around.
Yeah.
Horseface just played it incredibly
It's okay
cool.
because it pays off to what is, a very clever plan.
Yeah. And there's no need to have a big kind of action tension sequence of sneaking around and working your way into the van without anyone seeing. So, yeah, Horseface just taking it in his stride, which was pretty cool, and shows his loyalty to the Union.
And this obviously continues on, doesn't it? We see the van in a couple of other places, and There's an episode like way down the line where Valchek gets a letter, doesn't he?
I think it makes...
And it has a photo in it. It's quite a few episodes in, I think.
Yeah.
So there is a couple of small payoffs just to remind you that that van is still going around.
It's a reminder that those guys have played the long con, and that they can keep sending in pictures from different unions across the United States and make him more and more infuriated as it goes. Because I think it ends up in the West Coast, doesn't it? I think it's San Diego eventually goes to. It works its way around the bottom of America.
The only thing is, though, I mean, how do they just not all get arrested for that? Because they're standing there.
Yeah.
So in some of them, they're in shot. They're in shot with this van, and you can see like the license plate.
Yeah.
So they could prove that it was theirs, and they'd be like, "Look, our van went missing. Here's a photo of some guys with it." Like, why don't they just go and arrest them all?
It's certainly strange. Yeah, it's.
I mean, are they really not very good police?
I think that's a very good point, and it's never been challenged from when I've discussed The Wire until now. So it's good that we're kind of challenging it. If I did try really hard to defend it, I guess they haven't technically got any evidence that it was them that stole it. Maybe they just found a van that they liked and took a picture with it. But
yeah, maybe.
Again, as soon as you mention the lack of cameras, that theory kind of goes down the toilet as well. So it's certainly fishy. It's certainly.
I mean, it's clever. It's okay. It works as kind of in this context in drama because it's kind of it's cleverly done and it's well executed. But when you do try and kind of rationalize it in that sense, you can pick a few holes in it. I feel.
Yeah. Definitely.
But that is really only if you want to kind of get into if you want it to make ultra realistic or if you want everything explained. So,
yeah, definitely. I feel
but there are just a couple of moments where you're like. Taking a few liberties. What is an otherwise very realistic show still, it's not flawless.
Yeah,
because it wouldn't be. I don't think it would be very good drama if it were flawless. If it were kind of this flawless, realistic show, that it wouldn't, by definition, be drama.
Yeah, because nothing's dramatized, as you say. I guess. Is that what it would be? Yeah. So. Yeah, it feels like
that's fine.
That's a fairly big plot hole, actually. I think when you come to think of it. Yeah. So there's
but that's the end of our feud. That's feud section.
Pretty meaty, that one. What have we got next?
So we'll move on to what's going on in the prison.
Yes, excellent. So
the prison stuff is good, and it gets better.
Sweet.
But I'm just going to do. Okay, I'll split this into two. I was going to do it in one, but now I look at it again, I'm going to split it into two. So this first one. We have Brianna Barksdale, who is the sister of Avon, and she visits him in prison and pleads with him to look out for her son, D'Angelo, as he took a 20-year sentence for their family. They also discuss the loss of their New York connection, Roberta. Brianna tells him that their money has been returned and that Stringer had to deal with the Dominican's lawyer because they fear it is unsafe to deal with the Barksdale organization with Avon imprisoned. So Avon recommends a contact named Vargas, who owns a wheel rim shop in Atlanta. Brianna also tells Avon that D'Angelo's girlfriend Danette has been out of touch, and Avon has also noticed that she has not visited D'Angelo. So that's just one scene there. I just thought I'd cut that up just because the other section is quite large. So that's basically our first scene where we see Avon with Brianna.
Yeah, it's an important scene. It finally brings D'Angelo back into the fold. People are actually kind of talking about him and trying to do the right thing. But I guess everyone's kind of feeling very guilty about him, and particularly Avon, who tries to make excuses for not going to visit him. But I assume that in reality he can't really face looking him in the eye, just because what he's put him through, really. It's pretty grim what he's had to face as a result of the Barksdales.
Given the fact that obviously we're throwing all spoiler alerts out the window here, do you think it's possibly a lie that he makes to Brianna?
Because he does say a very telling. Is it you know damn well I ain't gonna let shit happen to him, mate.
Yeah, I mean, is he plotting at this point? Does he kind of have it in mind?
It's
not really revealed, but it's. I found myself wondering that when watching it.
It's slightly, unsettlingly foreshadowy, but I never for 1 minute ever thought that Avon wanted Dee gone. Although it is odd how anti going to see him he is at this point. I always assumed that was just a guilt thing. But he still had a lot of love in his heart for him and didn't want anything to happen to him, and it was all to do with Stringer, the D'Angelo's demise. So, it's that's my take on it anyway. And I assume that a lot of his kind of acting strange around D'Angelo comes from his perhaps taking up of drug habits and that sort of thing.
Because it's never... I mean, obviously, like what you're saying about it is kind of generally accepted, I think, as what happens.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I thought on the way through as well. But, watching it again, I'm just wondering, because it's never fully, revealed.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Maybe
I'm just a little suspicious of Avon.
Unless Avon knows Stringer so well that he hasn't, set the thought aside that Stringer may well do something that he actually ends up eventually doing, where he tries to go for kind of an internal assassination.
You know damn well that I'm not going to kind of do anything to him.
Yeah. But
someone else might. I don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of doubt there, isn't there? It's a very tricky
I think just
one.
because it's not fully revealed, it's just, I don't know, I wanted to speculate on it.
It's good. It's good that it's not fully revealed because it means we can really have these good chats about what, the kind of mind frame of these people here. Brianna, she's certainly a bit strange. She's not a likable character, but she technically should be because she's the only one who really perhaps wants him cared for at this point, or certainly visibly does anyway. She sent him to prison for 20 years, but still kind of wants him cared for. It's a strange kind of contrast that I don't fully buy.
Demonstrates quite an really telling cognitive dissonance almost in these people, that they kind of want it to be about loyalty and about doing this time if you've got to do it and never giving anything up, but then at the same time being really kind of compassionate and looking out for people, and you kind of look out for them kind of to an extent, and then
just drop them off and send them to prison for 20 years. It's a very, very interesting moral code that I could never understand really. She doesn't quite add up for me. So I think it's great. The best scene with Brianna is really the one in season 3 where McNulty kind of delivers this very slam dunk to her, where he kind of points out the fact that she was the one who made him take the years, and you can see she feels every ounce of guilt from that. But for the moment, she's a character I can kind of... She's a character that deserves to be there, but she's not particularly likeable at all. I'm sure she's just there because they found a woman who looks so much like D'Angelo they had to use her.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely look related, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the second part of the prison section.
Yeah, sure. I guess have we talked about Donette? Is there much to say about Donette, really?
Not really.
No.
I mean, it's just all we know is that she's not been going, so we've not been seeing her.
So no one's been seeing him, as I guess what Brianna's trying to say.
Yeah.
But as we know, both of them weren't happy in that relationship we saw last season.
It just seemed very sort of stale, didn't it?
Yeah.
There's just nothing overtly going on.
And as they say in this episode, it's all about the child now. It's just about getting the baby over to see him, rather than about getting Donette over to see him.
The relationship is almost like a formality.
Yeah.
For the child.
Absolutely. Yeah. So quite a sad state of affairs in the prison.
So moving on to our second part with the prison.
Yeah.
Later on, we see Wee-Bay's cell being searched and trashed by a guard named Tillman, who is also physically aggressive towards him. Wee-Bay complains to Avon that Tillman is deliberately targeting him because he is the cousin of one of the victims he was convicted of murdering. Avon agrees to meet with Tillman, but is also instantly rebuffed when he approaches him. Stringer later visits Avon at the prison and tells him that the Atlanta contact has been put into play. And Avon tells Stringer he needs help to deal with Tillman and also find Donette and ensure she visits D'Angelo regularly. And then finally, Avon gets to meet with D'Angelo and finds he is taking cocaine in his cell with another inmate. He asks D'Angelo how he is getting on and tells him they need to talk. That's kind of the rest of our track where we have Wee-Bay and D'Angelo involved. And Stringer.
Yeah. Well, we had the Tillman Wee-Bay altercation, which I found it odd how much I felt for Wee-Bay in that scene, particularly as he's arguably the most morally corrupt character in the show thus far,
Yeah.
And has killed by far the most people. I guess the turning point was really kind of when we see his loyalty to the Barksdales in taking those bodies just to take them. And I respect the kind of intelligence of that decision and the sacrifice that Wee-Bay put in. Instantly, I guess, winning back some favour with me. So when Tillman does come along and messes his shit up, even if it is over I think it's over because Wee-Bay killed one of his kin, right? Something to do with that. You do kind of feel for Wee-Bay, and even his motorised fish, which seems kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I think the idea is that Tillman is the cousin of one of the victims that Wee-Bay supposedly murdered.
Yeah. Okay. So
I thought it was interesting how when Tillman kind of like almost like assaults Wee-Bay and he has him pressed up against the wall and everything, like Wee-Bay's facial expression is just there's no fear there at all. Like he doesn't care. Like
yeah,
he's not at all bothered by it. But when Tillman goes for the fish,
yeah.
Wee-Bay's entire body language changes completely, and he's like, "Oh no!" It becomes like he's not worried about someone beating him to crap, but he is worried about someone throwing some plastic fish on the floor. I mean, what a strange character he is.
Yeah.
And he even sort of laments it later on to Avon, doesn't he?
The fog of my fish,
About
old
the
man.
fish.
Yeah.
Didn't have to go there. So yeah, Wee-Bay's a very sort of strange character, really.
He's he's got an odd bit of sentiment for the fish. I think we feel for anyone who's taking Tillman's shit. I think he's quite a clever plot device, really. He doesn't really feel... He's a very short-lived character, but he doesn't really feel like a contrivance because the way Wee-Bay's character is set up as a murderer, a mass murderer almost, and Tillman is ultimately the reason that Avon's able to get out within 18 months. He's the plant for the I guess it's for the hot shots, isn't it? So he's essentially just there to get Avon out, but he feels like a very integral part of the prison environment, though. So it's certainly not wasted by any means.
Yeah. Then we have a little bit of power play between Tillman and Avon. Avon sort of agrees to try and meet with him. It's almost like a schoolyard confrontation. Avon's reaction is almost like a sort of kid who's not used to being told what to do.
I think it's the only time in the show that Avon's parlay has been denied.
Yeah.
By anyone really, because Avon is.
But only because he's in the kind of situation where someone could deny him.
Yeah.
I mean, if that were out on the street, he just wouldn't be done, or
be dead.
It'd be over.
Yep. Absolutely.
But finally, especially seeing as Tillman is, literally above him, he's kind of on that stairway.
Yeah.
Looking down on him. We see Avon actually in a position of weakness, even as he's trying to run his little empire from the prison.
Yeah.
He's going to have to do better than just, parlaying.
Definitely. As we see, they go for the long con, a Sobotka style long con. And then Avon with his KFC, which they layered that next to the stevedore's breakfast, actually, which was the beer and the egg, which I thought was quite nice. I wonder how the process of him gaining the respect in the prison worked. Unless some of the guards knew him from the street, maybe, or it's a tricky one. But he's certainly
not really sure.
Yeah.
He must have gained, he's clearly a character that's gained notoriety and whatnot through his actions before. I guess why, he could do it again.
Yeah.
Must have his ways.
Yeah, definitely. So, Avon's just, he's too entrenched in the street to not be taken care of in prison, I guess. So, again, he has money, isn't he? That's the most important bit when it comes to home comforts.
And then... obviously, at the end, we have that shot that you were talking about, very voyeuristic shot into D'Angelo's cell, where they're kind of like sneaking in, and almost as if the camera's like sneaking up on them using cocaine.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's meant to be Avon's field of vision that we have there.
Yeah.
He's kind of waiting outside, isn't he?
It's odd, isn't it? It's kind of, it's someone's at least. Avon's not there at the time, but just, whoever wants to look in. It's a great shot, and odd to see D'Angelo using Doesn't seem at all like the man we knew in season 1. And it would just be great to see some of the psychology of how prisoners changed him. I mean, they were going to make a sub-season, weren't they, or kind of a mini-series spin-off just for the politics between seasons 3 and 4. So I think they were going to try and condense all of Carcetti's electioneering stuff into that. I would have loved to have seen kind of a prison mini-series where we really understand the psychology of how these characters have changed, because D'Angelo is really brushed over here. He's a completely changed man, and it'd be, I'm sure, you know, prison is always going to change someone, but it'd be nice to see the steps taken there. So
yeah, I think we can accept that after that period of time passing, there's going to be some kind of change going on. But like you say, it might have been more satisfying to have something where you could find out exactly what's been going on and what causes a character like that to change. Because D'Angelo, we feel like we know this character, and then suddenly we don't, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you can't always have all these blanks filled in, but in this particular instance, I think you're right. That would be a nice thing to see.
And the show always makes it clear that with the prison stuff is a whistle-stop tour. You're seeing the important scenes, and despite that, the prison feels so well realised, doesn't it? It really feels like it's got the grit to it that your average kind of urban prison would have in America, and it feels like it's got everything it needs to become a miniseries. It's just they haven't got the time for it. So, we
do see characters in a lot of different places throughout the prison. I think that's kind of what makes it feel like a real space, isn't it? Instead of having a couple of places where we keep seeing them over and over, we see the prison from lots of different places for short periods of time, so it feels large. It feels like they're going places throughout it. They're kind of having a life inside this prison, rather than reducing it to, say, a cell or a place where they eat or something. We kind of move around it quite a lot, so...
Absolutely.
They use their time wisely, I think, even though it is quite brief compared to a lot of the other locations that we become familiar with.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always that great scene out on the yard, isn't there, start of season 3, where the b-ball game stops for Avon's kind of crossing, which I always think of as a really nice location in the prison that we see some of. It'd be nice if we saw a bit of Cutty in these scenes as well, right? Because he's... Yeah,
technically he should be there, shouldn't he?
He should be hanging around with these guys as one of the Barksdale greats of the 80s or whatever. So
might have been nice if they'd thrown that in, but...
Obviously that they hadn't cast...
It's difficult to know how much they had planned or anything like that. They probably hadn't gone that far ahead.
It was great to see that Colvin's been set up in season 2, because he turns up later on in the season, kind of just to plant himself in before season 3 starts, but... I guess they couldn't quite do that with Cutty. It's just the way it goes sometimes.
So, moving on to our next track then, our next major track.
Sure.
So we're going out of the prison, and we're going on to the Greeks moving into action.
Yeah.
Or at least their crew moving into action in general. So we start off with Sergei, who's gone out of town to another port in Philadelphia and is using fake Coast Guard IDs. He orders the Atlantic Light to be held in port, which prompts one of the crew to come ashore. And then Sergei and his crew chase down this crewman, beat him up and bundle him into the back seat. Sergei and his associates then violently interrogate the now naked man they've captured, whose name is Sam, and ask him why he fled the Atlantic Light. The Greek and Spiros then arrive, and the Greek initially appears to have a more forgiving, pragmatic kind of approach. And Sam admits that he let his crew have sex with the girls in the can in exchange for money after he let them out of the container. One of his men killed a girl, who was then dumped overboard, and the other girl saw, so he believed he had to have them all killed as well. Once Sam's tale is finished, Spiros slowly cuts his throat. The Greek then orders Sergei to ensure that there are no fingerprints or face left on the corpse. And we have this very calm, very measured approach from the Greek on this one, which is, at its very core, manipulative and deceitful.
Yeah.
Just to get the information that he needs, and he gets it, and it's a really brutal scene, actually.
But I guess the important bit is that they take no pleasure in torturing him or anything like that. Unlike Valchek or Rules or McNulty or Tillman this episode, there's no grudge holding. Like, once they have all they need from Sam, they dispose of him in the quickest, most humane way possible. Okay, fair enough. A gunshot to the head would have been more humane, but
I don't think cutting someone's throat slowly is humane, Toby.
But a gunshot to the head would have certainly been quicker. But it left them, would have left them more exposed to capture potentially, or there was certainly no time spent torturing him. So, but yeah,
no, I mean you're right. They don't kind of do it.
Yeah.
They don't seem to do it for some kind of sick pleasure or for thrills or to prove that they're hard men or anything like that. It's just they've got what they want. Now you're done.
Yeah, certainly. That's kind of what I was going for. I wasn't suggesting at all that having your throat cut is a nice way to go. Not at all. But it certainly gets it over quickly compared to a lot of ways of doing it. And you kind of have the Greek making calculations about prostitution income while the Turk bleeds to death like a lamb, as he puts it. So it's all just
mind your shoes.
It's just completely pragmatic to the ultimate degree. So I thought that was a very nice exploration of the way they do their business, whilst being very brutal. And
then because that's the thing. It is really, really kind of violent. It's almost like they are more violent than anything else in the whole show, really.
Yeah.
I mean, to order someone to, basically cut off their hands and face. I mean, that's kind of worse than anything else that we really come together. But I suppose what happens to Brandon is pretty horrific. That's pretty bad. But they're doing that for kind of like a sick pleasure. They're doing it literally to torture him.
It's part of the grudge, isn't it? Which these guys don't have. But
yeah. So I mean, they are very kind of visceral, but very unfeeling about the whole thing. Which makes them, in a way, more scary.
Definitely, yeah. I've often seen discussions that the Greek kind of represents the purest form of capitalism in the show, and
okay, that's interesting.
So I was quite like that reading of it, and the way the Greek knows exactly how to allocate resources for the most economical outcome. And it's always about the price. And it's kind of money for the sake of money. So this scene I think captures that quite well. And there was one line where it was, he doesn't know anything, yet you kept hitting him anyway. I mean, what's the point in wasting your effort if you're not getting anything out of him?
And he's killed this guy, and he says he's like 4 million gone.
Yeah,
that's all he sees. He just sees what that guy was worth.
That's what.
I mean, I guess I can. Yeah, it does seem. Seem like an interesting conclusion on what the Greek represents.
Yeah, and then there is that point, skipping ahead a little bit, where Sobotka eventually refuses to do any business with the Greeks forever, and they only need to raise the price to re-engage his demand. So I think they literally just say, let the money talk, and the money does talk. I think they triple the price, and he's back in with them. So there's no conscience to him at all. He causes perhaps more havoc than anyone else in the show. But he's right at the top of the criminal chain as far as the street side of the show goes, on like the informal sector. So he distances himself from all the trail of destruction that goes on from what he does. So he really is quite just a fantastic character, I think. Yeah.
Right, there's a couple of other small bits and pieces from the episode that we can cover just to finish up our discussion, or finish up our recap of discussion.
Yeah.
So first off, we do have where Valchek has assembled and is briefing his new detail that he gets from Burrell. And this is in the portside office that we see, and obviously becomes quite a major location throughout the whole show for the detail.
Yes, of course.
And it's kind of nice to see it again. There's a really sharp colour contrast.
All those greens.
It's the fact that it goes from kind of the outside of the building, and it's kind of very white, and there's like that red foliage in the background, and it cuts in, it's suddenly very green. It's just a big kind of interesting use of colour there. I thought it was nice. And he has them he basically tells all these people that Prez is the lead investigator and that he's a prodigy. But unfortunately for Stan, Burrell has sent them the most incompetent officers in their respective units, including the familiar face of Detective Augustus Polk.
Yes, what a guy.
Who is back, and the first thing we hear out of his mouth is who signs the OT sheets, which is back to where he began.
Just pulling the string out of his back, yeah. So it's
that's almost like that to me in this episode feels like the "and we're back" kind of moment.
Yeah, it's like the show has now kind of re-established itself, hasn't it?
Or
Albeit,
at least in terms of its kind of like, in a more traditional TV formatting sense of kind of re-establishing things that have been going on before. Here's a sort of familiar feeling, a familiar set of characters, and now in a new setting.
Yeah.
That's kind of the Wire's version of it.
for anyone who had trouble adjusting to season 2, you'd have thought this might be a big turning point for you as things kind of settle back down into the format you want. Yeah, albeit with only Prez and Poke as our, the returning members of the cast, so to speak. Everyone else.
Who'd have thought that after seeing the first couple of episodes of season 1, who would have thought that you'd see a detail room where Prez is the smartest guy in the room?
Yeah.
You wouldn't have imagined that from the beginning, but there he is.
Yeah. It just speaks to Burrell's misallocation of resources, as you were talking about last week, and earlier in the episode as well, where he's not as behind the whole detail thing as he perhaps suggested in the meeting with Valchek. It's nice that happens though, because there's that great scene where Valchek has to go back to him and beg for a Daniels-led team if he's going to get any support from the First District.
Makes it a lot more interesting instead of just having all of the people at the top are in league with one another and against the people at the bottom, because that's sometimes how it's viewed. Not only by the characters in the show, but obviously I guess it's viewed by people in general about institutions in the real world, that there is this kind of amorphous mass of people at the top of the chain in league with one another, whereas in reality it's not quite like that. They're kind of at each other's throats as well.
Yeah, it's just they're vying to be the top of the top.
Yeah, it's just a big clash.
Yeah, it was a disappointing amount of action in the detail they kind of formed right at the end of the episode, so we're going to have to hold our breaths on that one and come back to this strand next week, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 more small ones left. So we have a moment between Rhonda Perlman and McNulty as they continue their very casual relationship, despite how drunk he is. She questions their relationship's directions and tells him not to come to her house again. He admits that he still hopes to reconcile with his wife for his children's sake, which prompts her to walk away and look into a mirror in what I assume is a kind of time to treat yourself with a bit of respect kind of moment. That feels like she's looking into the mirror and a bit like, what am I doing? Why am I kind of doing this?
Yeah, why am I such a child? Sort of thing, yeah.
So, yeah, this is another just, head-shaking McNulty moment.
Yeah, it certainly shows that they're the wrong fit. And I guess the main question to ask is, why does she keep accepting Jimmy again and again, and every time, resolving not to? Is it out of loneliness, or is it out of...
I think it must be that, because we don't see Perlman being out, we don't establish any kind of other relationship with her other than the slight thing that she has with Daniels. Obviously, she's like assistant state's attorney, so she probably doesn't have a lot of time for anything like that. So I think it's fair to assume that McNulty comes knocking, and in a weak-willed moment, she's just kind of like, it's a bit of company, but McNulty's not really the person you probably want knocking at your door. And
there was the one lone time where she was the instigator after they delivered the case at the end of last season, where her happiness just kind of led her to being the Jimmy, calling.
They're both as bad as each other, really, in a way.
She's got her.
Just McNulty's a bit more obnoxious.
Particularly in this scene, it was a very, very, really felt for Rhonda, with Jimmy just deciding to end it all with the wife comment as well, a real killer. Yeah. But yeah, I guess it's clear that Rhonda has her professional life sorted down to a T. She's kind of climbing the ladder in a really reliable manner, but her home life is certainly, it leaves something to be desired for her, and it's nice that she resolves it over the course of the show as well. So this is kind of Rhonda at a bit of a low here.
And then last of all, we have a very small scene with Daniels, who's with his wife Marla, and they've obviously come back from some restaurant meal, and she apologises for bringing up his career, and he basically says in response that he will be putting in his papers, which I assume means that he's thinking of essentially leaving, going on to become a lawyer or something like that.
Yeah.
And I feel like this scene is basically there to be like, oh, no, he's not. Like, guess who's going to be heading up the detail at some point,
Yeah, and any smart viewers, I guess, would have kind of put 2 and 2 together at that point. Yeah. I do enjoy these little catch-ups in season.
Very
two.
short scene, but it serves a purpose.
Yeah, I enjoy the early season 2 Daniels because it's just so different to everything else. It's kind of seeing all this talent going to waste and the sense of wondering where he's actually going to end up. Also, perhaps the warmest we ever see the relationship between Marla and Cedric. It feels like they're kind of not just robotic kind of political machines together. There's some sort of...
Yeah, we're talking about functional relationships earlier. I mean, there's another one.
Absolutely. This is them at their most tender, I think. We see them, perhaps, in the show. They've obviously been out for a nice meal or something on their way home, so...
But it still also confirms that pretty much the only time we ever see the two of them speaking together, it's about, this happened in my career.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry that happened in your career. Here's some advice about your career. And that's kind of all of the conversations they have with one another.
A show consumed by the professional, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so it's a very kind of functional relationship. But you're right, this is a very short, even a little heartwarming scene between the two of them.
Yeah. Definitely. Right.
So that wraps it up for Season 2, Episode 2 in terms of recap.
Okay, let's do our final 4 categories then, shall we?
Alright. 11 more years, whatever bullshit they throw at me. I'm gonna put in my papers, take the pension, and walk.
Yeah. 11's a long time to be on the shelf.
Tell me about it, Mr. 13 years.
4 months.
Fuck it. Chew you up, they gotta spit you back out.
And let's kick off with our favourite scenes. Do you want to start us off, Toby?
Yeah, I will do, yeah. Again, it's so difficult, and I have to cheat almost every week, really. I thought the stuff with Beadie was really good this episode. She's not the most appealing character, but she's such a rookie that it makes sense that it kind of makes every scene with her and her meeting the police that we know and love kind of excellent and feel like a real journey of discovery. And it feels like a good way to kind of kick the season off. So I enjoyed those, and I just enjoyed the kind of CSI elements of finding out about the dead girls as well and where they come from and kind of their backgrounds. So I thought that was really good. And the rules jurisdiction battles in the offices really I found pretty fantastic as well. So I think I'll throw those out there as the scenes that stuck with me the most.
Yeah, I think I was going to say the scene with all the commanders in as well. I thought that was nice to see all them at a different level, and sometimes I think the police department can sometimes feel a bit isolated, and they don't get involved with other services as much.
Yeah.
Whereas here they do.
Yeah, definitely.
And nice to see rules under pressure at that level, rather than there's someone under him causing a pain. No, these are people that can actually have power over him. So that was very interesting. I also do really like the scene where we see the crewman from the Atlantic Light trying to escape from Sergei and getting caught and bundled into the car, and there's this almost like, I don't know, almost James Bond-esque kind of quip at the end where he's like, have a good night, and they're just leaving in the car, and we know that there's someone bundled in the back of the car, and it's almost like a very sort of silly moment, really, but it's very telling that there's an action scene, a chase scene, no music, all we hear is kind of screeching tires and running and
get him up. Yeah, it's
it's
brutal.
really kind of quite a tense scene.
Yeah,
it's very well done.
Absolutely.
Just very simple. Just kind of simple and quick and over and nothing too flashy. But I did quite enjoy that. I think I do like the wire action scenes. They're just very different to what you normally get from action scenes, and that makes them satisfying.
And they're so few and far between that they really do all make an impact, don't they?
They're very rare.
Yeah.
If there's a shootout in The Wire, it's like, I think there's like 2 in the whole show.
Yeah, but when they happen, they're pretty.
But
fantastic,
when they happen,
aren't they?
yeah, they matter. So
definitely.
So it's fine. But yeah, I think I'd pick those 2. Like you say, it was very difficult. I mean,
yeah, definitely. Right, favorite character. Do you want to go for this one, Alex?
Yeah, this is another very tricky one. I got to admit, I obviously the character himself is not very likable, but I do still think that the portrayal of Valchek is very good, and we see Valchek on his travels here, and we see him kind of going around sweet talking all these various people, and he kind of does that really so horrible spitting on the floor of the Union House as he leaves. Like, I think generally speaking, Valchek, he does feature very heavily in this episode, and when he doesn't feature as heavily, he just comes along as a bit of an annoyance, and he's just there to be a problem and be a bit of a bad guy. But I think he's well portrayed, and in a way, I kind of like the way that he works a lot in this episode.
Oh, he's great. Yeah, that kind of, he nails that kind of ratty demeanour, doesn't he? It's just it's all there. He's a fantastic actor.
You just, as I said, I think in the last episode, we just love to hate him, really.
Yeah.
But like I say, he's in this episode an awful lot. So
yeah,
thought I'd give a shout out for Valchek in this one.
Good choice, definitely. For me, I chose the tie between kind of Rules and Sobotka. I think for me, kind of building on what you said about seeing Rules in a new environment where he hasn't got the ultimate authority. Certainly, he plays it very, very well and adjusts to it nicely. So I thought the actual debates themselves were very, very interesting, and it was nice to see that he can put up an incredibly good fight, but can't run from the cold hard facts of McNulty's tidal calculations, which are indisputable. And so at the end of the day, Rules was fucked over, but I enjoyed seeing him fight his way out of it, or at least attempting to. Yeah. And then Sobotka, I thought the two kind of anger rage fits were fantastic, brilliantly acted, and really cathartic on both accounts. The first one being with Spiros, where he was understandably pissed off with the girls being in the can, and then the second one with Valchek, where they kind of go back to some deep-seated high school rivalry by the sound of it. So those would be my two picks this week.
Nice. Let's have a little chat about the title then. We have McNulty taking up our title and epigraph this week. And Collateral Damage is where we'll begin. I think, obviously, we have McNulty quoting it about Ray Cole, having to be assigned the murder.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the specific usage of it, the kind of literal sense of the words this episode. So Cole eats the case for the wider good of the department, having to solve the murder, following Jimmy's tidal calculations. But then it can also be used to describe pretty much every institution in the wire, that being that economic efficiency is at the cost of a number of things, all of which you could consider collateral damage. And in a lot of cases it is murder. In a lot of cases it is getting people screwed over financially and stuff like that. So it's another one of those that really kind of encompasses everything if you want it to.
In this episode in particular, it has a reference to these feuds that are going on, and it's like hurting other people around them. So we have the Valchek Sobotka feud, and the stevedores are getting hurt by that, and now the police department itself is going to be hurt by this missing surveillance van. Yeah,
it's true. Absolutely, and that ties very heavily into the epigraph as well, doesn't it? Really, which is they chew you up, they got to spit you back out. A McNulty quote. So I guess that's referring to how Rules needed to prepare to face Jimmy's revenge when he demoted him. So demoting him was the chewing, and then facing the tidal calculations was the spit out. And could also be a reference to Jimmy's 14 shots, which I imagine ended up coming back up by the end of the evening. But I guess it's just kind of the revenge theme, which runs very, very strong through the episode. You have it's all about,
the fish, their collateral damage.
Yeah, I mean, Tillman gets involved. It's the ticketing the cars, stealing surveillance.
We have vendettas in the prison
all
as
away.
Well. So
that most of them are from one source, and it's just once you've done one wrong, you've always got to take an eye for an eye every time afterwards. So as we were saying, it's going to just kind of be a war from here on out of various forms of revenge against each other. So
yeah. And then our epigraph, which is they can chew you up, but they got to spit you out. Again, from McNulty. That's when they're in the bar, and he was talking about his 11 years that he's prepared to do on the force before he gets his pension.
That's right. Yep. So it's
I mean, I guess he's just saying that it's they can put you in it, but you've got to get out of it at some point. Right?
Yeah,
it'll come to an end eventually.
I don't know if, as I was saying, my interpretation of that was it's just the idea of revenge. So if someone wants to chew you up, they've got to spit you back out, which is the bad bit. So Rules demoting Jimmy as the chew, and then eating his title calculations was spitting him back out. So I guess there's a number of ways of reading it. Yeah.
Yeah, just again, it just ties into revenge.
Yeah.
So that's episode 2, and we'll continue on to what's the next episode called? I've forgotten it now. Is it another water-based one?
Very vaguely, if you wanted to be. I think it's Hot Shots. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we have there are some water-related ones in here, but they're sort of a bit spaced out. We have a couple of other generic titles, don't we?
Yeah, I think on the whole they're a lot stronger. Hot Shots is a good title because it refers both to the kind of detectives on the case, the Lester and Bunk double act, and then you also have the Hot Shots in the
don't
prison.
ruin it for next week.
Ooh, spoiler-free podcast we ain't.
Well, I'm thinking more like we'll have nothing to talk about if we start talking about it now.
I'm just too eager.
But yeah, we will be joining you next Friday for another episode. Just a reminder that we will be taking down all of the first season episodes by the time this episode is out. So the iTunes stream will now only be for the current season that we are doing. And you can get all of the episodes online if you want to download them. You can find us on YouTube, just search for Caught on the Wire, or you can download them from caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And you can also get in touch and read more information about the show on there. Anything else you'd like to say before we go, Toby? Or are we all sorted?
I think it was a very full episode there. I think in an hour and a half we've done. So I don't think there's anything else to say. But just come back next week and we'll have another great discussion.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore? Baltimore. What you know about Baltimore? What you know about Baltimore?